Hey guys, Joe Miles here with Osseo Gear. This is the Mission Whitetail podcast. We're going to be doing a deep dive into what it truly takes to kill these mature bucks. We're going to step outside the box and look at the why for gear, tactics, training, and more importantly, the mindset from over 35 years of chasing these magnificent animals all over North America. Thank you for following along and welcome to Mission Whitetail.
All right, guys, Happy New Year. Mission Whitetail 2025, episode number 73. And like I promised last week, we are going to start 2025 with a bang. We have got Mr. Bobby Worthington back on the podcast, starting the year out right. Mr. Bobby Worthington, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Joe. How's things going over your way?
Going pretty good. Did some recurve hunting down in Texas and Mexico. Got my first buck with a recurve, so that was a lot of fun. And now got one more trip to Texas here the end of the month, and that's going to wrap up my hunting season.
Oh, good deal. Good deal.
How about you?
Well, yeah, I just got back from a Beagle field trial. Had a good year this year deer hunting. Anymore I measure success, I guess, other than I used to. I got some meat deer for the freezer, and the old deer I really wanted to kill, Gimpy. I think it was shot by a muzzleloader guy up close to the property there, and I laid there for 40 minutes. He said it was head up. He got close to it, and he tried to finish it off and shot low, and it run off, and he never did recover, and I hadn't either. But it's interesting. I got a faint picture of one that could have been him about 3 weeks after that, not long ago. And that Gimpy, he never summered on me. He's one of those that made that spring and fall transition. And the deer is kind of like a dog. If you ever get a dog hurt real bad or hit by an automobile, they used to go under a house. Of course, anymore we've got underpinning, but they'd go under a house and lay there a week, I've noticed. And so I don't know if he's dead or not. I feel like that there could be a chance that he went back to where he spends his summer months. I know a guy that I run into him this year, and it's the first year we actually talked about this deer, but he said, Bobby, there's a big 10 points on me all summer and hits my mineral licks and disappears in the winter. And I said, I described the rack, and he said, yeah, that's probably the deer. So that's about 3 miles, 4 miles maybe from the property. And I'm hoping that when he got injured bad, he laid up for a while, then maybe went back early to his summer range. So he was 9 this year anyway, and a bad injury is probably going to be hard on him. He drew his best rack. And this is very unusual for big woods deer. Now, farm deer, where they get all the nutrients they want, I see this more prevalent, but this is one of the few times I've known of a big woods deer growing his best rack at 9.5 years old. But this deer actually did.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, you see a lot of deer in Texas. They get 7, 8, 9 years, and they're still putting on inches, but they're getting all that protein, all that mineral, and they continue to go and don't really start losing anything until 10.5, 11 even.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either, but it makes sense in a place where you can supplement feed and they've got all the nutrients they want. But for a big woods deer, I like to shoot them at 5.5 or 6.5. Usually 6.5 is their best. Most of my big woods deer, I've noticed that starting at 7.5, they would start going downhill, and really a lot of times they drop off pretty hard after that.
Yeah.
But they're individuals, and he put on more inches. That I never did hunt him seriously. He never was really too big a rack, on the 140s, which is okay for a big woods Tennessee deer. But this year he shot way on up there, and he'd been close to 160. Brown Hinds was nicer than they ever been. They was up there 5 inches and maybe 6, and all of his points were longer. And it seemed to me like he got a little wider now. That may be unusual sounding, but for some reason his rack really put on the inches this year, and I can't attribute it. Of course, I put Maximizer, that Real World Maximizer minerals out, and I can't attribute to that because he did not summer on me and don't summer on me. But
well, maybe that guy he summers on, maybe he was really pouring the minerals and feed to him, and that helped him out.
Well, he could have been, but he's in a big wood type situation too, and don't put a lot of. I don't think he does anything particularly for the deer. He just happened to notice him. He's got some cattle, and he just noticed him around his pasture fields, and he got a few pictures of him. Now, whether he had the cameras on the men on saw, and if he did, he'd probably just been sawed.
Gotcha.
On cattle saw, probably. But I never asked him much details. But I thought it was just an interesting story. I just hope he's alive. The chances of his rack being bigger after being injured pretty severely, and he may not be dead. He may not be alive. He may have died, but I'm going to do a hard search for him in that general area where he was shot this spring and see if I can find. I'd like to at least recover his rack and respect it. And the neighbor that shot him is a real good fellow, a good friend, a good neighbor.
Yeah.
And but we'll see if we can find him.
Well, that can lead us kind of right into a couple of the things we want to talk about when we have those classes up there at your place. Maybe we can, when you got 10 or 11 guys there, we can make a pass through a couple of those areas and see if we can't find him.
Yeah, we sure might do that. Of course, I like to look at as many funnels as we can. I think last year we evaluated 28 of them, and but it wasn't an hour pass with that many people. You're right; it wouldn't take long to cover some ground for sure.
No, well, let's talk about the class a little bit, Bobby. We got 4 of them this year, and I'm going to go ahead and give the dates. The March 28th through the 30th and the 9th through the April 9th through the 11th. Those are already full. We do have April 25th through the 27th. We've got 5 spots left in that one. And then April 30th to May 2nd, it looks like we've got 6 spots left in that one. So we do have a couple spots left. But, last year was the first year you and I did this, and it was a huge success. I mean, we had basically a waiting list, which is why, the classes have filled up so quick based on the feedback we got. But kind of walk through, for the listeners, for guys that are maybe thinking about signing up for those last few spots this year or maybe even looking at next year, walk us through what all we cover in these classes, Bobby.
Well, we're going to do it a little different this year. The first evening when everybody comes in, I want to do a little seminar, and the main purpose of that seminar is just to show the importance of hunting funnels. I know there's a lot of stuff out there about how to hunt whitetail in the big woods, and this is big woods. It's woodsmanship skills. But I think they all are small in comparison to hunting where several corridors or where a buck is forced to go through, because they just really no pattern to them, especially during the rut. So I stress the importance of funnels and why we hunt funnels, and then we'll go over the different types of funnels that I've categorized them over the years: long range and short range, hard and soft funnels, and just several different categories I cover on funnels. I think I've got about 7 or 8 different categories, and I'll give them a piece of paper with that, because when we get in the woods, I want to know. I want to ask them a lot of questions. So the first day we'll cover the different types of funnels. After we cover the importance of hunting funnels the first evening, then we're going to spend a day and a half. We're going to let them get started a little earlier home this year. So that's why we're going to do the seminar the first day they come in. But we'll give them a day and a half, maybe a little longer, day and 3/4 in the woods. And as you know, Joe, what I do, I'll go to a certain area here on the place that I manage. It's about 3,000 acres. And a lot of people say, well, no wonder you kill all them big deer. You kill them on ground that nobody else can hunt. Well, the owners have always hunted this and invite all their business friends. And to be honest with you, I made my reputation before I ever moved up here hunting public ground. I traveled all over the Midwest and hunting public ground, that's where I killed 80% of the big bucks that are in North American Whitetail magazine. But anyway, when we get to the woods here, I'll go to a certain spot and I'll say, gentlemen, I want you to head off in this direction, and I want to give you about 30 or 45 minutes, and I want to walk down there, and you're going to find a good spot, hopefully, and there's a funnel down there, and I'll walk down there, and when I get there, I've got about 10 questions outlined for them, and I want to know, are we going to hunt one tree here or two trees, and I want to know, of course, which tree and which direction they're going to face their tree stand. Then we're going to cover what wind direction to hunt the funnel in and how thermals affects this funnel. And I'm going to ask them some questions. Is it a hard funnel or a soft funnel? And how will that affect the tree stand location? And is it a long-range funnel or a short-range funnel? Is the funnel good enough to blind hunt, or would you wait till you got some intel that know for sure that it's going to be hunted? And there's just numerous questions that I want to ask, and what I'm trying to say here is really this is a hands-on class. It's probably the most hands-on class there is. I'm not going to walk to the woods with them and start pointing out stuff. I'm going to let the hunter, the participants go down there themselves and have plenty of time to evaluate things and talk things over. And then that will really help them when I get there and start pointing things out, because they've already discussed it and thought about it. It'll really help them learn when we start really evaluating things. And some people may see them a little different than I do. Joe, you was in the class with me last year, and I think what I point out is so much common sense and so logical once you see it from my viewpoint, once I explain it, that we never did have one discrepancy. We never did have a participant, and we had some very knowledgeable participants. Some hunt on hunting shows, and we never had one person to say, no, I would do it different. So I think what I say is so logical once you see it and hear it that it makes total sense. And it's simple. It's not something complex. If it was, I wouldn't be the one teaching it. Maybe you would, but I wouldn't. But it's pretty simple. It's simple to me. Once you do something long enough, it becomes simple. But, it's simple, but it ain't easy. It take a lifetime to learn some of the things I think I'll be pointing out. It took me a lifetime to learn them anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think another good part of the class is that once you've established where your stand's going to be, whether it's both sides of the funnel or one side, depending on when, and the enhancement that you can do to your tree stand, like ratchet strapping in trees to get more cover and putting in some mock scrapes, doing a little bit of hinge cutting to tighten up some trails, all that to enhance the funnel is pretty monumental and something that to me was very eye-opening and made up, like you said, a lot of sense and a lot of common sense on things you can do to enhance the area once you determine that is the spot to be in.
That's right. That's right. That's part of the questions. Does the tree need cover to it? And does the trails need manipulating or enhancing? And is there ways to enhance them? And mock scrapes would fall into that, of course, mineral licks, to form the trail a little different than it is now. I don't have the list in front of me, but we cover a whole lot of stuff, and see that jumped out to you more than the things I mentioned. And to some people, they may already have a little bit of idea about that. And another part of it, like how the thermals work in that particular area, or how the wind works at that particular stand side, would be interesting to some too. So I tell you, we spend a lot of time at each funnel, and we still get, I think last year it was 25 or 28 different funnels we evaluated. Got a lot of good feedback, never got any negative other than a couple of gentlemen was like me, they's a little long in the tooth. Well, in the case of deer, it'd be short in the tooth. If talking about jaw teeth. But anyway, one of them said it'd been nice to get a little earlier start home because we work both days to dark there, and so that's why we're going to do it a little earlier. But we had no complaints about the information we put forth and what people learned at all. But this year, like we said, we're going to give everybody a little start home a little earlier if they want to head home that evening.
Yeah, and great accommodations there at Fall Creek Falls at their lodge. That place is spectacular, and then good food right there in the restaurant. So it's every year we'll make it a little bit better. But man, I gotta say, for something like this, being in a central location with big woods, and it's something that you don't necessarily have to have big woods for it to be, a part of your knowledge or a part of your craft to add to what you're doing. I mean, this year, for example, the farm I hunted in Kansas, it was a 50-acre farm, but it had a heck of a funnel. The south wind spot, you couldn't hunt that part of the funnel. I mean, there were 5 trails that came together, and there was a big creek and kind of a bluff that came off the creek, and I mean, it was 5 trails that came right there, and I saw every single buck on the property I could have shot right there. Every one of them came through there while I was hunting. It just, the big one that had been in there early never showed back up. And then the north wind spot, remember I was kind of texting you on that. It was at the head of a ditch, and there were 2 big trails that wrapped right around the head of that giant deep ditch. The problem with it is it was soft from that point on up, and a lot of the deer would cross on up. They were getting around that ditch, but there was one side of it was not hard, so it wasn't pushing them all the way down to me. So quite a few deer would pass behind me. But again, that big buck was only in there in the very end of October, and he was only there I only got pictures of him for 2 days. But that was something that I learned this year, putting this method to the test, is that like the south wind spot was a very hard funnel, and every deer came right through there, was killable. And then that other one, it was about 50% came right in range where they should, and the other 50% were on the soft side of the funnel.
Okay, it was a hard. One funnel was hard on both sides, the other was hard on one side and soft on the other. I remember that.
Yep.
Yeah, I've used this technique. When I first started hunting the Midwest in the early 1980s, managed areas, I would occasionally get permission to hunt a farmland, but they never done anything for the whitetail. They was just farming for cash crops, and I used the same technique. It don't matter if it's just a strip of woods between 2 fields. You still got to hunt where all the trails come closer together, where you can get them on one side of you or the other, where you'll have the wind direction right. This technique works anywhere you hunt. In my book, I talk about I've got a big section on the different methods of hunting whitetail deer, because nowadays it has changed a lot, where we've got this, as I do, whitetail land consulting, and even on those properties, you still got to add to your percentage the mathematical odds that deer is going to come by you, and the way to do that is to have as many deer in front of you as possible, and the way to do that is find something that will restrict them and move them around it, or through the middle of a restriction. I tell you, these classes, Joe, the people that want on them, they're probably going to fill up at Shipshewana, Indiana. We got this mid-test, I think it's called the Midwest Whitetail Classic, but if people want to get on board, they might all do it before we go there, because we're going to be sitting there talking to people and telling them about the class. And I actually just got off the phone before you called me with a guy from South Carolina, and he's going to sign up. You probably got email. He said he done emailed you just a few minutes ago. But anyway, they're going to fill up class fast, and I don't know how many years I'm going to be doing this. So people that's interested might want to get on board with this before they fill up this year, because I feel like after what is the February, they're going to be full after our Sportsman Classic.
Yep. Yeah, it's the Shipshewana Midwest Sportsman's Classic is the name of it, and it is February. It's on that board, Wells. 13th through the 16th. 13th, yes, February 13th through the 16th in Shipshewana. But, you know, that's I think the timing of this podcast, a lot of guys hunted this season and you know, like you and I very well know, there's peaks and valleys. You'll have a couple seasons where it's tough, and then a season where you can't do any wrong. But, some guys have had some frustrated seasons and have gotten confused and different things. So I think it's a really good time to be talking about the course. And guys, if you want to sign up, we've got about 10 spots left. But if you're not able to do it, like if the time, you don't have the time to do it, the dates won't work for you, I would encourage, guys to grab a copy of your book. And I'm not trying to, we don't ever do this on our podcast. We're not trying to make this a salesy push for any type of product. And I hope it's not coming across like this, but the value, if you talk to anybody that did the class last year, they would say they learned more in that 2.5 days than a lot of time in the whitetail woods. But if you're not able to do the class, I think picking up a copy of the book is a really good idea, because this book that just got released is Final Quest, and it's basically taking everything, Bobby, that you have learned and taught and done in your career and put it into written format. So it is certainly a very, very good whitetail book to have in your library, and you can learn a ton from it.
Yeah, I'd recommend them read the book before the class. So many times in life about any subject, we don't know enough to know what we don't know. And people might have questions, and I get it all the time, that are just so basic, and I thought, this guy don't even have an overall view of what's going on and what you need to do to kill a big buck. If they read the book, the thing about it is they'll have a good overall view. It'll get rid of the confusion and the ignorant questions, and they will have questions then, much more in-depth questions that they didn't even realize that they needed answering. A new question will arise in their mind. And so before the class, I'd recommend anybody read the book. And before I teach traditional archery to anybody, I recommend they read those 2 chapters on shooting a recurve bow, because that gets them so far along that they can now begin to apply immediately the practical stuff I show, because I'll explain to them. They'll get some people are visual, and they'll get to visually see what they read, and they say, "Oh, now that makes sense now to me." So I would recommend that. And you mentioned 2 important points. You said the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, people have been frustrated with their hunting. Well, I tell you, Joe, that expectations is one of the key words that I talk about a lot, that is so important. If your expectations are out of line with reality, then you're going to be frustrated and you're going to be disappointed. I'll tell you, no amount of knowledge, and I give this disclaimer in my book, no amount of knowledge I give you will make a buck out of thin air. You cannot kill one where one does not exist. For instance, this year on this property, old Gimpy was the only deer that I wanted to kill. There's other old bucks around, but he's just the only one that had the rack, and I had the history with him good enough that made me want to kill him. And once he got shot and disappeared off my cameras, it would have been ludicrous for me to just keep hunting and say, I must be doing something wrong. I ain't killing that deer. But some people have those kinds of expectations. They expect if they get the right knowledge, they can kill a deer on their property, even though on that given year they may not be a huge buck there, like your trip in Kansas, for instance. You knew there was one big buck there, and he disappeared, and you could see the benefit of the way you were hunting, because you've seen so many different bucks, and all of them, not just off in the distance, all of them were in range. And when someone talks to me about hunting techniques, and they say, I think I'm doing things right. One of the questions I'll ask them is, did the majority of the deer you seen, did 60 or 70 or 80% of the deer you were bow hunting, when you seen them, were they within range of you? And if they say no, then I know there's a problem with their technique. But the problem the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, and if some people realize this, and this goes back to the old days when I used to travel all over the Midwest hunting managed areas, public hunting. I would always plan my vacation the last week of October and the first week of November. And that worked great back in the late 70s and early 80s and through part of the 80s. Then I got to noticing a trend. I got to noticing it was too warm even up there, getting more and more warm. And it got to the point where maybe half the years, every other year, we'd have a good cold period during that time, and then even less. There is no time more productive than killing a trophy whitetail buck as far as the calendar goes than November 2nd or 3rd through the 7th or 8th. That is it. That period is more productive than the whole remainder of November. But that period is only productive if it is unseasonably cold. So if it is unseasonably warm, that real hot period will be the activity will be mostly at night instead of the day. And another interesting fact is, if it is unseasonably cold, and you only hunt the first 2 or 3 hours of the morning, the last hour or two in the evening, then you're not taking advantage of the cold weather anyway.
Right.
But they will move just as much at 12 o'clock in the day as they do daylight if that period is cold. So look at the number of hours that you have productive hunting activity. It's all about increasing the mathematical odds of success, but look at the number of hours. 12 hours compared to 5. So that's more than double your chances of success. And if you do turn that around and do it the whole week, then it is really productive. But what I wanted to say is, I've been looking at this worm temperatures for the last 5 or 6 years, and a question arose in my mind: does the thermostat trump the calendar? So what I'm saying is, if nowadays I had a vacation, I only could hunt my vacation and was planning on taking off and taking a vacation, I had 1 week to hunt, would I, knowing that the first week of November is probably going to be so warm it's going to be not conducive for all-day movement, would I wait till later? Would I wait at another week? Would I look at another period on that calendar? Or would I continue to hunt that most productive few days, hoping that it turned cold? Or would warm temperature during that time still be better than cold temperature later on in November? And I have finally come to the conclusion that from my trail camera pictures and being out there and studying and talking to other people, I finally come to the conclusion that the calendar does not trump temperatures. Temperatures trumps the calendar. So if I had to now pick a week, say I had 1 week in November, I would pick the 19th. I'd start at the 19th and go through Thanksgiving. I would still not pick that hard lockdown, and a lot of times it's still warm even then in the Midwest now, but I've noticed that the real big deer start getting back on their feet around the 19th. Now, they'll get back on their feet, of course. They'll lock down about the 9th or 10th, and they are hard locked down then, most of the bucks. But as you know from sitting in a tree stand all through November, you'll see a doe, and she'll be flagging, and she'll be in heat. They can go out in the field. As soon as that doe comes out of heat they're with, they can go out in the field at night, and it won't take them 10 minutes or go through the woods, and it won't take them just a little bit, and they're locked back down. Then they're locked back down. But about the 19th, I've noticed, now scientific studies may show something different, but what I have noticed is that it's getting harder and they're longer between does, and they're not long enough between does of starting around the 19th that you can start seeing them big deer again. So I just thought my listeners and your listeners might find it interesting to know that I have come to that conclusion. If I had to pick 1 week that I could hunt in November now, it would not be that first week because of the temperatures. I have noticed this, and I've really paid attention because I wanted to learn this. Now, I didn't have this in my book. I really came to this conclusion after I wrote it. I finally decided after this year that it was true, that there's no doubt about it in my mind that the 19th through about the next 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 days would be better than the first week if I had to take a bet. Now, if it turned unseasonably cold, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd of November through about the 7th or 8th, it's going to override what I just said. That will be the best, but the chances, the way we've had the last 5 years, the chances of that happening is just too remote for me. So I don't know if I got off on the chasing rabbits down empty holes or not, but I thought that might be interesting.
No, I think that's a good point. And if a guy's got 2 weeks of vacation, maybe he does that Halloween to the 9th or 7th, that would give him 7 days there of vacation. And then his next vacation week, if he gets 2 weeks, is that 19th to Thanksgiving. Then he splits it up instead of going, the 1st of November to the 14th, that straight through is split it up and be a little more strategic about it.
That's a very good point. You might take a bet and hope that that 3rd through about the 7th or 8th did turn cold. You might take that chance and hunt hard early and late, and then plan on another one. But I would definitely, if I only had one, I'd go with a later date. If I had 2 and I know it was going to be cold, then I go the 25th or 26th of October through the 7th or 8th or 9th of November. That's my first pick. If the weather happens to be cold, I got 2 weeks. If I've only got one, then we're talking about like the 2nd or 3rd of November through the 7th or 8th. If that's a week, I ain't figured that up. I know that's second grade arithmetic there, Joe. But
let me get my calculator out.
Things has changed and we must evolve. And you mentioned one other thing, confusion. There is a lot of confusion on the internet, and a lot of things put out there, and some of it's by people that's just hoping to make money on their technique or what they're saying, and some of it is, do you hunt transition? Do you hunt beds? Do you hunt the bedding area? Do you hunt
food sources?
In beds? Do you hunt a food source? Well, in the big woods, it's going to be a hard time finding a food source that they're on every day. It may be a hard time finding even what they are feeding at certain times, especially during the rut. What I'm saying is there's a lot of confusion, and it dawned on me that a guy might come up with something on his own or read about it or see it on the internet, and he might get out there and try that, and just simply because of the time he has spent in the woods, he might kill a giant. Oh, that did work. And he may hunt that way for many, many years when really it was not the technique that he was using. It's not why he was successful, but just the sheer amount of time spent in the woods. And, I stressed 3 points in my book, and time in the woods, I say, overrides everything. So if you look at a lot of people's trophy rooms that's got a reputation for being real good hunters, those big bucks, if they've got a wall full of big bucks, they're either very knowledgeable, or they spend a tremendous amount of time in the woods, or they post them. I hate to say it, but if you dig deep and really pay attention, a big lot of the people's trophy rooms are full of giants that they fudged on. And if you talk to the local game ward, you might think, yeah, we're trying to we caught that guy 10 times. But here's the other scenario. Instead of a wall full of big bucks, you'll find a lot of people has one really nice trophy, and then several 3.5-year-olds. And those are usually the guys that has got a technique that they're using that by the sheer amount of time in the woods, they've caught up to a giant, and it looks really good, and then they just keep on going and going, and they finally start shooting 2 and 3-year-olds. And those people might not be using a tactic that maybe unknowingly to them, they could use another tactic and maybe be more successful. They really hadn't got it figured out yet, and that's what I try to help people with. I've got some big deer. I've had 7 featured in North American Whitetail magazine, and I'll tell you, they don't compare to what you'll see nowadays. You can go to people's houses and they've got a wall full of 200-inch deer, and there's hunting has changed. It has changed a lot. But back when I was killing them in the late 70s and through the 80s, every time I'd kill a big one, 180-inch deer or something, which would be a 200-inch now with all the specialized food they're planting in plots and the minerals. But when I'd kill one of them big old deer, people would tell me that's a once-in-a-lifetime deer, and it truly was back then for anybody that killed one, especially on managed areas. But I kind of started figuring things out, and I was able to do it off and on several times, and I've been very fortunate at it. But I just believe that there's two ways of hunting nowadays. I believe it has changed enough now that we could call it by 2 different names. There's modern whitetail management hunting tactics, which is for the people that can afford a big farm, and they go in and they hire a consultant like me that comes in and shows them where to work the habitat. So we want the deer bedding over here, so let's clear cut this and let's plant switch grass because there's no trees. You could do one or the other, and then let's plant this food plots over here, and in between the area here, we can set up a way to manipulate the deer where they'll come by you stand. We could call that modern whitetail management hunting tactics, and that's great. It's good for the deer. They're getting plenty of nourishment, and a hunter that don't have a lot of time, he can see and kill some big deer. But everybody can't afford that, Joe, and that's why people are saying. That's why people are saying a lot. You hear that hunting's becoming a rich man's sport. Well, that type of hunting is a rich man's sport because everybody just can't afford several thousand acres or several hundred acres that they can manipulate and control 100% and keep people off of it. But now, hunting's not becoming a rich man's sport. There's the other type of hunting, which is, we could call it the old school woodsmanship hunting tactics. And there is plenty of managed areas. I mean, there's getting to be more and more, and there's plenty of managed areas where hunters can still be successful doing it the way I done it. And before there was any management, I mean, hardly ever would you even hear somebody planting a food plot. And if they did, they just throw a handful of red top clover out there. But there is still plenty of managed areas. Some of them plant food plots a little bit, and some of them don't. But there is still plenty of that old school woodsmanship hunting opportunities out there if somebody wants to take the time to learn that. And of course, that's what I talk about in my book. That's what I teach in my class. That's the way I choose to hunt. You kind of do a little bit of both. It's all good. It's all good for the deer. But I honestly believe the way I hunt goes plumb back to Stone Age, plumb back to the Indian era. You know, you don't manipulate where the deer bed and where they feed and how they get between the two. They choose where they bed and where they feed and how they move around in the woods, and then you use sign interpretation, scouting, to decide those things and then decide where to set up. And to me, that's just really the most rewarding way for me to hunt anyway. I just, we all want challenges in life. And some people make it easier, and some purposely, like you hunting with a recurve this year, hunting with a compound instead of a crossbow. We all want challenges, and when you have the bigger challenge, and if you're successful, the bigger reward. And I think that's what most people thrive on.
Yeah, I agree with it. We talked about that, about how there are two styles, and I really do enjoy it. I mean, obviously, I enjoy the challenge of finding a particular deer and hunting that particular deer. And I enjoy, hunting here early in South Carolina, August 15th in that velvet season. I enjoy that. I enjoy going to Alberta and chasing those big deer up there early when they're on the alfalfa fields. And then right now, I'm absolutely over the moon with hunting these bucks down in the brush country in Texas and Mexico. I love that. And that would all fall into that kind of that modern managed hunting tactics, and I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Now, the real challenge, and probably what I enjoy the most, or I don't know that I enjoy it, because as you well know, there's a ton of work that goes into it, is chasing some of those Midwest giants in the bigger woods where you are hunting those funnels. I enjoy that from a reward standpoint. It is so rewarding to kill one like that in his natural environment, where he's able to come and do exactly like you say, like they've done for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. People that in the big woods that learn to hunt on their own, and they don't get stuff off the internet. Of course, back when I started, there wasn't no internet. You'd read some articles from some good hunters, and you'd get out in the woods and learn it on your own. And it's funny to me that myself and Roger Roth there and Gene and Barry Wenzel, we all hunt about the same way. I've read Gene and Barry's books now that they're writing books, and they've talked. And they read my articles in North American Whitetail. People that learn it on their own and not from somebody else and just kind of rehash it or change it around, they all come up with basically the same thing. I recently dug out my old Fred Bear. Of course, everybody knows who Fred Bear was. I recently dug out my old Fred Bear catalogs. They advertised their bow and arrows from the late 60s and early 70s. And in his catalogs, he would always feature something. In one of them, he featured how to turkey hunt. And the tactics he talked about is very similar to the most advanced tactics used today. And I got to reading through last week, I got to reading through the old Bear magazine that talked about deer hunting, and where Fred Bear commented on it. And I was just amazed at how much stuff in these few paragraphs he said that is in my book, and just elaborated on it further. Well, I think he learned he met Art Young in 1929 in Detroit, Michigan. And him and Art started making bows together, and he learned a lot of his hunting techniques from Art Young. Well, Art Young, and he learned a lot on his own. Of course, the big game he hunted in Africa and around the world. But deer hunting, he learned a lot from Art Young, I'm sure. And Art Young learned from Ishi, the last American wild Indian. He's of the Yama tribe. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But a lot of people's heard about Ishi. Well, now Ishi wasn't, like I say, and in my new book, I've got a part on the history of bow hunting. I talk about all these fellas. I want people to learn about their heritage, and in there I talk about Ishi, and Ishi was not his name. That just meant man in his tribal language, because Ishi was a man of honor and respect, and it was the custom of their tribe not to tell someone your own name and introduce yourself. That was considered disrespectful. Another member of the tribe was supposed to introduce you and say your name, and then you could say it. But there was no one left in his tribe. In the wilds of California, he was the last American Indian, and that's an interesting story, and I talk about it quite a bit in my book. But anyway, there was no one left to introduce him, so he wouldn't say his name. And they finally figured out what tribe he was because of the language they would finally hit upon, and it was right, and he couldn't tell his name. So, but anyway, that's just an interesting part of that. But Ishi taught Art Young. They hunted together a lot. Then Art Young, Fred Bear met him, and if you learn it on your own, you just have a lot of similarities. I was reading in this Bear Archery catalog where Fred Bear, and the one he was talking about whitetail deer hunting, and you'll find this interesting. He says, hunting from a blind will produce the best results. Then he goes on to say the blind should be 20 to 25 yards from a good runway. Well, he's talking about a deer trail, well, he says runway or trail. And he says it's a good idea to have two blinds, one on either side of the trail. You can use the one that is downwind from where you expect the deer to come. So, when we go to a funnel, and when I talk about in my book, I talk about putting a tree stand, if at all possible, in a good hard funnel on both sides of it. And that will not only let you hunt it more days because you'll have more wind options, but it will also let you hunt a wind that is just almost right, but not quite right, and give the deer a false sense of security there. So that comes from Fred Bear way back in the early 70s. And next he says, listen to this. If an intersection of two trails can be found, your chances are double. Now that's interesting. And I've often said, and I say it in my book, the essence of funnel hunting is you never cover one trail when you can set up and cover two trails. You never cover two trails when you can set up and cover three trails. So he mentions here that if an intersection of two trails can be found, your chances are doubled. Well, I read that in the early 70s, and I reasoned that if you can find two trails and double, you can find three and triple your success. You can find four and quadruple your success. And when I got to finding four, I realized it was forced to be there for certain reasons. So that's how I kind of started evolving as a hunter, and it's just interesting that people that's learning on their own, and I'm amazed at a lot of stuff I read in this book, but it's interesting that people learning on their own come up with really the same thing. And I'm going to read it here again from page 13 from Fred Bear. The title is Hunting the White-tailed Deer by Fred Bear. And it says, never walk runways to or from your blind. In spite of a thorough bath that morning, loaded with right guard and deer scent, you leave human scent and alarmed deer in that area. So he's saying that even if you're loaded with right guard and loaded with deer scent, I guess some kind of cover scent, you still leave scent. Then on down in the bottom of that section, he said, tree blinds are becoming very popular in states where they are legal. And Joe, I remember where a lot of states thought it was unethical. It was too much of a hunter's advantage to use a tree stand. And Tennessee was one of the early ones that got on board, and that's when I started using them. But tree blinds are becoming very popular in states where legal. They all but eliminate, now he was a little bit wrong on this, they all but eliminate the wind direction problem, and deer seldom look above eye level. Now that was the case when we first started using tree stands. You didn't have to get very high. 12 foot would have worked. He said, but be sure that your tree blind is a sturdy one, well anchored to the tree, and that precautions are taken to prevent falling from it. Never carry your bow up with you. Pull it up with a cord later. So I just think it's just fascinating to read way back then the evolution of this, and plus the really fascinating thing to me is how he and Art Young and Ishii, the intersection of trails, they understood that you hunt, multiply your chances by hunting where more come together. And here's another part he said, deer are colorblind, but light-colored clothing will show up in dark woods and will be seen when you move. And, I've got a pretty good little section, paragraph or two in my book where I talk about how well deer can see white. I believe that's how they identify themselves in the woods. even if they're motionless, they see that white pattern, and they was given their whitetail for warning by God, for their warning signal. And I'm very careful about taking something light or white in the tree stand with me. Well, I didn't come up with nothing new. Fred Bear was talking about that back in the early 70s. And let's see. Here you go. On page 21, he said, most bow hunters do not practice enough during the hunt. Carry several blunts with you or blunt heads from your converter points. Of course, he patented and come up with this interchangeable points on arrows with the insert. He said, and shoot several times at different times when you do not expect game to be near. And, I talk about in my book, carry 2 blunts with you in your quiver and shoot them in the area you don't expect deer to walk up and smell them like in a clump of brush. But stay in practice during the day, because you get to hunting so hard, maybe you don't get to practice. And if doubt enters your mind and you get to wondering, hey, has something changed about my shooting? And that lack of confidence will cause buck fever to kick in. But I thought that was interesting, and we just got a lot of our ideas. The people that get them in the woods, they discover the same things. Let's see. He talks about buck fever here. That's an interesting section on page 20, and how confidence helps avoid buck fever. And I've got another chapter in my book dedicated to that. Where it's talking about closing the deal. And then he says on another page, the rutting season in the North States begins about the middle of November and lasts about a month. Well, the lockdown phase, what the old-timers used to call the rut, the peak of the rut, the lockdown phase does begin about the middle of November and lasts through the end of the month. And then he goes on to say a little bit about some buck sign, and then he goes on to say that it is in the pre-rut that the hunter will have his best chance of success. Well, he's talking about the end of October through the first week of November. That would be the pre-rut, because that's just before the lockdown phase, the true rut. Then, of course, we follow that exactly. So I just think it's very interesting. There's a lot of other stuff in here that's stuff that we teach and we follow, and people that learns it in the woods learns the same thing. And I want to read, he was really a sportsman and really big on sportsmanship. And here on page 43 in this Bear catalog, he says, consider your right to hunt a privilege and do not abuse it. A kill is the anticlimax. If you hunt only for this reward with a bow, you will have many disappointing moments. Find pleasure in the woods and in streams. Enjoy animals large and small, the flowers and birds and the sweet odor of wet leaves. Be alert to the sounds of nature and rejoice and thank God that you live in a free country where these pleasures are available to everyone. So I think that just sums up hunting and sums up Fred Bear. So I thought you might find that interesting.
No, we never have really done a history, if you will, on bow hunting and whitetail hunting on this podcast. So no, that is very, very refreshing, and it comes at a great time. Most guys are wrapping up their hunting season, or they've wrapped it up. It's coming to an end. You got until, I guess, the first Saturday in February in Ohio, and then you've got you've got some stuff, down in Alabama and Mississippi. I think they go in Louisiana. Maybe they've got some February stuff as well. But, most of the seasons are coming to an end. So it's a fresh perspective because guys have grinded all year. And that's a good way to look at it, is just because you didn't kill a deer, it wasn't it wasn't a failure. You know, you got to spend all this time in the woods.
Well, most people, I'm telling you, things have changed, and we've talked about this since I lost my son. I look at life and death a lot differently, and I just don't kill anything wanting for pleasure anymore. There's no way I'd get out here and shoot a bird like I used to or something, but I look at it different, and I look at the woods different too. Like Fred Bear said in that last piece I wrote, and I say that if you Google it, you can find probably where I talk about that. While you're scouting, you need to notice flowers and look at them and notice the petals and the colors and how they mash together and how God created them. You need to notice giant trees that has been there for generations and give respect to them. They've lived a long life in a rough environment. You need to appreciate older deer and respect them for what they are and how they could survive in a very, very uncruel world out there in the woods with predators everywhere and pitfalls. And I'll just tell you, if you just rush through your year, it's all about scouting, find the best place, get up and hunt, and you don't notice comical actions of a squirrel, or you don't hear the songbirds or notice the wildflowers, then at the end of your season, if you're not successful, Joe, you'll be depressed. I've wasted my year. What am I doing? Should I spend this much time at this and not be successful? Well, you went about hunting with the whole wrong theme. You're not out there to enjoy the outdoors and to learn and enjoy other things besides killing the deer. Then you're in the wrong sport, because you're not going to be successful enough to only get pleasure from the kill. And we shouldn't be like that anyway, I don't think. I think we should enjoy all of God's creation, enjoy the sounds, the smells, like Fred Bear said, and the sights of nature. And I just think that people get too caught up maybe sometimes in the climax of it, which is only the kill. And I'll tell you another thing, and I talk about it in my book. There's several overriding themes of my book, and one of it talks a lot about the spirit of a whitetail and the heart of a hunter. And one of it talks about giving respect when you kill a deer. All people want to do a lot of people is rush up there and get those hero pictures and selfies with that deer and start texting them to other people. Hey, what about walking up there like a good friend of mine, Scott Goldman, told me he did this year? He killed an old deer, his best deer probably, and he's a great hunter, and he's been my mentor. He's learned from me for many years, and he said, Bobby, I walked up there and I sat down on a log, and I think he said he sat there nearly an hour and just sat there and appreciated the deer and was trying to think about how he made it through his life that long and what all he had seen and done. Hey, we need to give some respect to the animal. You know, nowadays success is judged by the number of kills people get on film and the number of likes on social media. And they just cannot wait to get that started. That's not success to me. The challenge, appreciating nature, appreciating that deer, and watching him grow up and learning about him. And then we live in a predator-prey world. There's nothing wrong with that. And then matching your wits against him. And then after it's over, what about when you're enjoying the meat of that deer? Thinking about how you appreciate that again, what that deer has given and what nature has given, what God has given. So I just think that in this fast-paced world of success and instant gratification, I'm just afraid that we're getting further and further away from what it should be. Even though we're hunting in nature, we may not be enjoying and observing and noticing nature. Even though we're out there, we may have too strong desire for the climax instead of enjoying ourselves and appreciating. A big part of life is appreciating what we have.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, it's no doubt that's, you know, kind of how the hunting industry has changed. I mean, we've talked about it many times on the podcast about how, you know, you scroll through Instagram or Facebook and it's just big buck after big buck after big buck. And if you take that literal small segment of what you see, I mean, call it 300. You see 300, you know, big deer on there, and you're trying to measure up to that. What you're not seeing is the other 12 million hunters out there that didn't get a big buck. You know, we're only seeing a snapshot of reality. And social media has it tends to skew things from reality. You know, people are normally only putting their best stuff on social media, and it creates a false narrative of what really is going on. And there is a chase. There's a chase to kill as many big deer as you possibly can, and that's what gets validation and gets the likes. But I do feel like we're starting to see a trend. You know, we're seeing more and more guys hunt with traditional equipment than I would think, you know, in the last 15, 20 years. You're seeing, you know, more guys that are starting to appreciate just being out there and accepting it and enjoying it. And so I'm seeing more and more of that, and it seems like there's a trend coming of that, which I think is very, very healthy.
I do too. And the trend to learn about nature and woodsmanship skills. You know, when you talk about woodsmanship skills, that's a broad term. A friend of mine, Paul Priest, you know, he won one of those survival shows. The woodsmanship skills can be that. It can be learning how to build a fire and how to build shelter and survive. Woodsmanship skills can be learning what all is edible in nature, or what my grandmother, they used to call her I forgot now, it was a nature doctor. They had a word for it. She'd show me about white planting and different stuff you can boil for certain stomach problems or kidney problems or whatever. And that's a woodsmanship skill. Then there's the one that me and you are interested in. That's a woodsmanship skill of learning how deer travel across the landscape and how we can intercept them. When I say woodsmanship skills, and when we're talking about them, it's governed toward whitetail deer, but there's a lot of other ways to enjoy and be in nature too, and that's all good. But you're right. When I tell you, people, that's like these young girls, they might see a picture in a magazine of a model, and they try to live or online nowadays, and they try to live up to that expectation. Well, you can manipulate. Nowadays, you can airbrush them pictures and get rid of all the flaws, and they just, I mean, people see a picture of me, they probably think that's been done, Joe. But really,
yeah, they definitely do, Bobby. I mean, I was thinking of you in the Victoria's Secret fashion model. That's exactly what I was thinking when you brought that up.
You know, them underwear was taken from the side of your camouflage there, where you got that pocket where you can open them up and get that.
Yeah.
I got them for that, actually. But, you know, and the same with deer hunting. These guys, you know, I talked earlier about a guy might be successful and think that's the way to do it, when really it wasn't his technique as much as maybe luck or time in the woods put luck in his favor. But I tell you something, a lot of these guys that you see, you're trying to hunt in the big woods, and then you see guys with great deer online, just hundreds of them. Well, big percentage of them are killed over corn in states that's legal, and that's fine. But that don't mean that guy knows anything about hunting. You may not know a lot more, but because of the way you're trying to hunt, you think you should kill the many big deer as he does every year, when really he's not going to say how he killed them. And actually, a lot of these guys that end up with a big deer or two every year are asked to talk on a podcast, and before you know it, they've got to come up with some way they've done it other than corn, because they're not going to tell that, and they come up with some stuff, and they put out there, then another guy does the same thing over here. Before you know it, there's so much confusion out there, and people are really confused about how to hunt, and if you can see what I was describing, that's how it evolves, and that's how the confusion starts. Then some people add their 2 cents to what they heard, which wasn't right to begin with. And really, like I was saying earlier, when you go back to the gentleman that's Fred Bear and all back to the Indian ways and the other hunters that's back in my era that were successful, when you go back to the people that have learned it on their own through being in the woods and learned that particular line of woodsmanship skills governed to kill big deer in their natural environment, then we've all, if you'll talk to us, you'll find out we all do it about the same way. We about use all of us use the same tactics, and I sat down at one point and was asked to write some articles, and back before, of course, I never did live in a bait state anyway, but back before a lot of big deer were being killed, and I had to come up and sit down and say, well, how am I doing this? I just slowly evolved to what I'm doing, and what am I doing? And then I come up with the 3 points that I've always stressed, and I stress in my book, and I talk about a lot. And that's just different than what's taking place today. And don't get discouraged because you're trying to use woodsmanship skills and learn the woods and do it in the public land or do it in some big wood setting, and you see all these deer, well, like you said, Joe, just all over the internet with these giant deer. Well, if you don't know how they're killed, for many years now, we've seen these guys that were these giant bucks, and they come find out a little later on they was caught, they was fudging. And just think of the number of ones, a very, very small percentage of them are caught. So if a guy's out there killing big deer and he's saying stuff and you're reading about stuff he's putting out there and he's saying stuff on a podcast that don't really make no sense to you, then there might be a reason it don't. So what I teach and what I talk about in my book, anybody that reads it ain't going to say, well, that's okay, I'll try that, but it don't really make sense. It's very complicated. No, it really ain't. What I say ain't complicated. It's very simple. Anybody can figure it out. If I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. I'm telling you, I learned from my mistakes. I figured everything wrong. When I'd try something, it'd be wrong. I'd say, well, I'll try something else, and it'd be wrong. That's, my mind I guess it don't work as good as some people's. And then finally I tried everything, and I said, well, this right here is left. My life's choice here. I might try that. I learned on the shaky stepping stones of failure, and not on success. So that's like carving a duck. When you want to carve a duck out of a block of wood, you can just carve everything that don't look like a duck, and what's left, that's your duck. So that's what I done. I figured out what didn't work real quick. I must have really been from Missouri, I guess, and just didn't know it. But I don't think so. My parents never left Bledsoe County, I don't think, when I was younger. But anyway, that's don't get confused and don't get disappointed, and take pride in doing it. If you're out there using the woodsmanship skills and you're not killing I didn't kill a giant deer every year hunting public land and learning how to do this through woodsmanship skills. The few deer I've got in my house, 9 or 10, 12 deer that people consider, that I consider real trophies. I mean, big, not just material, but big rack material. I want to shoot just some material deer. I wanted something nice, but hey, this is a lifetime, Joe, of hard hunting the way I done it. I mean, a lifetime. And I could go to a state maybe where I could bait, and if I got a good piece of property, at least that nobody else could, and bait them up, I could kill a good deer every year. It wouldn't be a lifetime, and post them on the internet, then people trying to hunt the old way, the way, the woodsmanship skill way, look at that and say, well, I must be doing something wrong. No, you just, if you decide to do this, your expectations has to be in line with reality, or you'll get discouraged. And that's what you were saying, and that was a good point. I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got buddies that have gone 1, 2, 3 years without killing a deer, and they are discouraged. I mean, just gone radio silent, and I try to say, man, it is, I use this phrase too much, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And when you're doing it the right way, or not, I won't say the right way, when you're doing it woodsmanship skill wise, where you're hunting some big woods public land or big woods private land that's not managed, and there's there's not a whole lot of giant deer on that property, man, it can be 2 or 3 years before you get one.
It can be 2 or 3 years before there is a giant on that property. Then it may take you a year to 2 to get it. So now you're getting into the 4 or 5 year range. What a person has to do is step back and say, now do I want to keep baiting, or do I want to start baiting where it's legal, and to set over the bait pile and know really nothing, don't have to know nothing about hunting, just be able to shoot it, or do I want to accept a greater challenge? And when I succeed, I feel like I have really, personally, I have accomplished something greater than setting over a bait pile. Do I want to? You just have to analyze your life and what kind of challenge you want in it, and whether you're willing to go, like you said, be in it for the long haul, and accept that challenge. Not the sprint, the marathon, but to me, it's more rewarding. I like to get out and hunt them in their natural environment. I like to walk through the scouting part. The way me and you do it now, Joe, the way you do it, the scouting part is the most rewarding part. Okay, I got a trail coming here. Then I'm going to follow this out. Then I got some big sign here. Hey, this sign here is from 3 years ago, and here's some from 5 years ago. Bucks has used this particular travel corridor for many years. I want to figure out why, and I want to find out if this merges into another travel corridor. And then all of a sudden you find it, and you found it. You know exactly that that's the best place in those whole woods to be set up, and you found it. That is the reward. It used to be said of old-time hunters, we scout 10 times more than we hunt. Well, the scouting is the figuring it out. That's the reward. The shooting is the anticlimax. I have outsmarted this deer. I have followed him around and figured out how to kill him with him doing the best he can to avoid predators. And I have figured out how to kill him. That is the reward. In the hunting the other way, setting over bait or maybe over a food plot, the actually killing the deer is the only reward, and it's the only climax, and I just don't think that is an endearing way to do it. I think the people that do it the hard way and then succeed, I think that is, they'll enjoy their sport a lot more, and that's the way that they'll stay in the sport and enjoy it and just thrive on it. And maybe if they do it another way, the bragging rights and the killing it and then the bragging rights is the climax. It is the reward, instead of when you figure out, when that light bulb goes on in my head and I figure out and I realize that I have figured out how I can kill him with a bow and arrow in close range, and I have put myself in a spot where I could reach out and touch him if I wanted to, that close. Because I know exactly the 2 feet he's going to be walking or standing, then that is the reward to me. So you just have to decide what hunting is for you and what you want out of it. And don't get me wrong, this what I call the modern day management tactics, growing the big deer, figuring out the food it takes and the cover it takes to keep them on you and grow them. That can be rewarding, and they've done a good job. And they've done a good job at learning what to plan and what to feed them and how to fix bed and cover that they'll live in. And hey, I've grown a 200-inch deer. That's hard. That's a good reward. But if, like you said, it's not a rich man's sport for everybody. And if you can't do that, then and you want to have the ultimate reward to me is figuring them out in their natural habitat. So there's different ways to do it, and there's different ways to have a reward, and all of them can be challenging. But I guess everybody just has to decide for themselves the route they want to take and what their budget and what their time will allow. But don't get confused. Don't think that it's a level playing field no more. Don't think that everybody's doing it the way you're doing it, and don't be discouraged because you're not you're not killing as many as they are because your expectations don't get them out of line with reality for what you're doing.
Yeah, and
Used to.
Go ahead.
It was all the same. When I first started, the late 60s through the 70s and early 80s, it was pretty well all the same. Now, people could afford to travel. I couldn't afford it, but I still did travel some to the Midwest, and we had people hunting in the Tennessee and everywhere, but we were all basically using the same hunting method. We were all using woodsmanship skills to figure out what the deer were doing. We were not trying to grow deer, and we weren't trying to bait them. Back then, baiting was illegal in all states. We wasn't trying to manipulate habitat where we'd have them bedding where we wanted. It was a level playing field back then, and stand hunting, not driving or calling, but stand hunting tactics was basically the same, but that is not the case anymore. And people need to realize that, where they won't get discouraged, and they need to also realize there's cheaters out there, and they need to realize that sitting over corn where legal is a different way to do it, but that may not be as challenging as the way you do it, and your expectations need to be in line with reality.
Yeah, and it's not an all or nothing, right? I mean, you can do some early season stuff or some late season stuff over some feed, and then you can, during the rut is use your woodsmanship skills. I mean, you can mix and match. You hit the nail on the head. It's what you personally like, and what you want to do, and what's challenging to you, and what your own, I guess, quote unquote, ethics would be. And I don't want to get into an ethical, philosophical hunting. We've touched on such good stuff now. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast to get into ethics and the philosophy of what's ethical and not ethical and that sort of thing. And that just gets down to splitting hairs and becomes the individual, what the individual themselves, what they want to do.
Well, it can be, but we still shouldn't use something that puts us in an unfair advantage over the game. But now, back in the day, like I said, and read to you, Fred Bear, tree stands was outlawed in a lot of states because it was thought that was an unfair advantage. And really, back then, it probably was, because, back then I could see why they would say that, because people were hunters back then. They lived in the environment. They wanted the challenge, and they had to accept the challenge whether they wanted it or not, because that was the way a lot of people fed their family. But if you lived in the woods and you learned that way of hunting, then really a tree stand made it pretty easy. With me, I could be on the ground and kill some deer. I'm not betting on luck. If you're hunting in some ways that they hunt nowadays, you're betting that the right buck will walk in front of you. But when you really learn the woods and woodsmanship skills and learn to read the woods, I know where the deer will be standing when I shoot it,
Yep.
So, unfair advantage to me, what you might do might be an unfair advantage to you, but not me. So things has just changed so much, I couldn't say baiting deer is an unfair advantage. They might be a guy that's just don't have many hours to scout. He's so busy with his wife and his family, and maybe he's not in a physical shape to be able to walk and scout and learn the woods. And maybe like I said, he don't have the time, which is a big factor. And that would be fair to him. And he made how little amount of time he can hunt, sitting over a food plot or sitting over corn. Hey, it might not even put the advantage to him. It would somebody that can spend a lot of time hunting another way. So, no, everybody has to decide what is a challenge for him, a personal challenge. And I don't want to hunt in a way that don't challenge me, because I won't have the reward at the end of it.
Yep.
So that's important to consider all that, of course. And I'm not putting no restrictions, and you're not either, on how somebody hunts. But if you do want to learn woodsmanship skills in the old ways, then boy, that's what I enjoy teaching, and that's what I've spent my life learning, and that's the only way I'll ever hunt personally.
Yeah, that's
the only way I care.
Yep. Well, Bobby, I appreciate it. We've been going here for a little over an hour, so again, we'll maybe 3 or 4 months get you back on here again, and we can do a recap of the classes and talk about some things we got coming up this year and that sort of thing. But looking forward to hanging out with you in Shipshewana. I know we're going to have a booth there together side by side, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And also really looking forward to these classes we got going starting in towards the end of March. So a lot of good stuff coming.
Yeah. At Shipshewana, I think me and you talk, I think me and you have a thing on the return to the old days of woodsmanship skill. That's on a Friday evening for somebody that might want to come to attend that, I think. And so I don't know what time for sure, but it's on Friday. The show starts Thursday and goes through Saturday.
Yeah. That's right. Yep, Thursday through Saturday, and it's in Amish country. And let me tell you, they've got a bakery up there called the Rise and Roll, and I am dieting now until then because I'm going to get some of those Amish donuts and just see how many of them I can eat.
Well, they are good.
Golly,
I really enjoy that and enjoy the tradition of the Amish community up there, and it's just a really nice show. Hey, I want to say thank you to everybody for listening and hearing my side of hunting and my philosophies and where I evolved from. And it's not the only way by no means. It's just what I enjoy. It's what challenges me. And no matter what you're doing or what method you use, don't forget to take pause by a big tree or a flower and listen to the birds and watch the squirrels. Because if just shooting a giant buck like you see on the internet is the ultimate goal for you, then you're going to feel like you've wasted your time. But don't do that. Take time to enjoy nature.
Yep. Here.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, buddy.
Me on here and give me a ramble.
Yes, sir. That was great. Thank you, sir.